S-O-N, or Robert.
I was a sergeant with the Dallas Police Department.
And how long have you been with the Dallas Police Department?
14 years.
14 years. And could you introduce yourself to the jury and tell them a little bit about your background and what did you do prior to becoming a police officer?
Prior to becoming a police officer, I was a youth pastor in the Pleasant Grove area. I'm currently assigned to the Southeast CRT Deployment Unit at the Southeast Patrol Division. I've been a supervisor for 7 years, and again, I've been on for 14 years.
And in your 14 years with the Dallas Police Department, Sergeant, what other assignments have you held?
Prior to being the CRT supervisor, I was a patrol sergeant. Prior to that, I was assigned to the South Central CRT unit as an officer, and then I was a patrol officer at the South Central Division and the Central Division before completing my police academy with the Dallas Police Department.
And you just mentioned the police academy. My next question is, what is your training and experience to become that led you to becoming a sergeant over CRT?
So I attended the Dallas Police Academy and completed that back in 2005. Every 2 years we do 40 hours of update training. When I promoted to sergeant, I attended a 6-week supervisory course through the Caruth Police Institute, and it's continued update training annually.
Continual training annually?
Yes, ma'am.
And Sergeant Watson, with CRT, is there any specialized training that your unit undertakes?
CRT mainly, that's different from patrol officers. CRT gets one main training course, which is arrest warrant execution, and that's a 2-day class, 16 hours. The SWAT unit puts on that training. That's mainly the only training that we have that is different from the patrol officers, outside of covert surveillance training also, and that's a 2-day, 16-hour class.
And CRT, that's the crime response team, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And is it under the patrol division?
It is.
And Sergeant, would you tell us a little bit about what do you do in CRT?
So the crime reduction team, at that time, there were 2 crime reduction teams per patrol division. Each team is comprised of 6 either senior corporals and or police officers. The one CRT team will work usually between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. and then the second one will work between 8 p.m. and 4 a.m. And what our responsibilities included, it was multifaceted, but the main things we dealt with were narcotics complaints, and those complaints could come from several places, including the division commander, the city council, citizens will call in complaints, and we'll check on those. We also executed arrest warrants. We got those mainly from our investigative unit at each station, which could include burglaries or BMVs. We would also work with outside units, including, DEA task force, ATF, the FBI. We work with municipalities that border our channel, and we'll assist them with any crime trends that are occurring in their city and our city that match. Those are the main things that we do on a regular basis.
And what, if you would explain to the jury, would a typical or a usual day for a CRT member consist of?
Once we come in, we usually have a detail that could be 10 to 15 minutes. People, the members will apprise each other of what they're working on or what's going on. Once you do that, there's reports that have come in overnight or the week. They'll do research. They'll go out in the field and conduct surveillance. They'll make traffic stops. They'll look for wanted fugitives, and that's kind of a daily basis thing.
And Sergeant, how many members, going back to September 6, 2018, how many members were on the unit that you supervised?
If I recall correctly, I think there were 5 at the time. I think we were short 1.
And can you please state their names for the jury?
It was Martin Rivera, Amber Guyger, Justin Hellengard, Thomas McPherson, and William Bruce.
And Sergeant Watson, so you were Defendant Guyger's supervisor, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you see the defendant here in the courtroom today?
Yes, ma'am.
Would you please identify the defendant by an article of clothing?
She has a blue shirt on.
We'll let the record reflect that this witness has identified the defendant in court. Sergeant, let's go back. So you said you had 5 members on the team back in September 6 of 2018?
Yes, ma'am.
and you were short a person.
I believe so.
And what's the criteria to become a member of the CRT unit?
Since it's an interview position, we look for character, integrity, work ethic. We also look for officers who are team players and work well with others. Officers who are responsible, have a good base for foundation for report writing, and know search and seizure law.
And is there a time requirement in terms of, do you have to have so many years with the Dallas Police Department to be considered for the CRT unit?
No, ma'am.
And typically though, do you take officers right out of the academy?
No, ma'am.
So explain to the jury, how does that work?
Once an officer leaves the academy, they'll be on field training, and that lasts for, I believe, 24 weeks still. Once they're off field training, they'll have a probationary period where they'll ride with a officer who has been on for several years, and then once they're off probation, then they can apply for a CRT or deployment or any other position.
And how often are spots available in the CRT unit?
A CRT is a stepping stone for officers to move from patrol to an investigative bureau or any other bureau within the department. So we do have some turnover, but that's just to get them to the next step.
And with respect to the defendant, were you a part of the interview team that interviewed the defendant for consideration for your division?
Yes.
Please explain to the jury how that process worked.
Officers have a specific period of time to notify once a job is posted within the department. When they notify a supervisor, then the job posting will close. Then the officer will have to gather whatever necessary materials that the supervisor suggests they need in order to interview. The interview is a panel of 3 sergeants. Sometimes the lieutenant will sit in, and every officer is asked the same question. The responses are taken into consideration, and they also submit a resume. And that's how the process goes. Once the interviews are over, several names are usually chosen and forwarded up the chain, and the chain of command will make a decision on who's going to take the spot.
And were you familiar with Defendant Guyger prior to the interview process for your CRT team?
Just a little bit.
And with the interview process with Defendant Guyger, I guess would you say that she was highly capable and competent?
Absolutely.
And that, I guess what you knew of her prior to her interview is that, did you believe she would be a good fit for your team?
I did.
And when we're talking about CRT, these are experienced officers. Are they proactive?
Absolutely.
And in terms of proactive, does that mean having to go out and kind of drum up your own work?
Yes, ma'am.
Please explain to the jury exactly what that means in terms of drumming up your own work.
So that would go back to researching prior offenses that have come in, looking for wanted fugitives who have an arrest warrant out for them, and we can't find them, or somebody hasn't picked them up yet and brought them to Lew Sterrett. Those are the kind of things, or narcotics locations. If a citizen calls in and says this place is selling narcotics, then you have to go out and be able to determine whether or not that is actually taking place.
And do CRT members answer calls for service, like over dispatch?
They do. When the call load is backed up, they'll answer calls. If there are hot calls, which are priority 1 calls that are robberies in progress, things where people need help right away, then we will definitely answer those kind of calls.
And so is it fair to say that CRT assists with the high-risk sort of crimes, or
Yes,
more
ma'am.
violent crimes?
Yes, ma'am.
Sergeant Watson, would you please explain to the jury, back in September of 2018, what was the focus of the CRT unit right around the time of September 6th? The task, and what were you guys working on?
The CRT team was assisting the SWAT team with some, I believe, robbery suspects. I can't remember the location, but there had been several robberies in the Southeast Division, and that was their mission for the time.
And were these robbery suspects, had they been problematic? Were they violent in the area?
Yes, ma'am.
And was there a high priority to assist SWAT with apprehending the suspects?
Yes, it's always priority to assist our other units.
And is it common for CRT to work with SWAT on these sort of, missions or assignments, if you will?
Yes, ma'am.
And on September 6th, did SWAT ask for CRT to assist them with some robbery suspects?
I'm not sure how it unfolded that day, but at some point, yeah, they requested assistance, and the CRT team went out there.
And the members of the CRT team, did that include the defendant?
Yes, ma'am.
And is it your understanding that they did respond to assist SWAT that day?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you know which perimeter were they working?
I believe they were working the perimeter right out aside the location.
And so would that be the outer perimeter?
Yes, ma'am.
And were you at the scene that day?
I was not.
Okay. Were you aware of the assignment and what was going on?
Yes, ma'am.
And how does that work? How do you receive a notification of what actually is occurring? Because at some point there were some suspects that were arrested, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And were you notified of that?
Yes, ma'am.
And then what is your role and capacity at that point?
So at that point, that's a SWAT operation. So the SWAT commander is out there, and they'll handle all of that. We just assist. So there's not really a need for 2 or 3 supervisors out there to control that situation.
And how would you describe your team back on September 6, 2018? Were you guys a close-knit team?
I believe everybody worked very well together. They worked good together, and they were very proactive. They worked hard together, and I never really had any problems with anybody.
Okay. And did anyone have any problems with you?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Did anyone ever express any feelings that maybe you didn't have their back or support them?
Not that I'm aware of.
And did you feel that way about any member of your team, that they weren't pulling their weight?
Absolutely not.
Sergeant Watson, what are, if you could explain for the jury, what are general orders of the Dallas Police Department?
A brief description would be general orders are the rules and regulations that tell officers what they can and can't do for the Dallas Police Department.
And would it be fair to say that there are numerous rules and regulations when it comes to the general orders?
Yes, ma'am.
And what are standard operating procedures or patrol procedures?
So the operating procedures are going to be a little more specific, and they're going to tell officers how they should respond to specific calls and deal with certain incidents. And they even have maybe the structure and responsibilities of different units within the department.
And is it fair to say that in regards to the crime response team, or CRT as it's known, that there is also a specific SOP related to your unit, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And within that, it kind of, as you stated, listed out the rules and regulations, but also in terms of how the sergeants and senior corporals and your duties and responsibilities.
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Poach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Sergeant, I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 22. And here, I'll have to let you take a look at that.
Oh, this is it.
And are you familiar with State's 22?
Yes, ma'am.
And what is this, Sergeant?
It's a copy of the Dallas Police General Orders and Patrol SOP.
And Sergeant, is it fair to say, I know that we mentioned earlier, but there are hundreds of pages of these general orders and SOPs, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And in a simplified form, we put them on a CD, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And have you had an opportunity to actually review this CD?
Yes, ma'am.
And these do in fact contain the general orders and the SOPs of the Dallas Police Department as they existed back in 2018.
Yes, ma'am.
At this time, Your Honor, I would like to offer State's Exhibit number 22. It is under Business Records Affidavit. I'm going to go ahead and tender it to the defense for objection.
Well, we object to it. It's talking about hundreds of pages of material that's going to confuse the jury. This incident was not an on-duty incident.
Can you speak up just a little bit?
We're going to object to it. It's several hundred pages of information that is not relevant. It's going to confuse and mislead the jury. This situation, the incident which occurred was Ms. Guyger was off duty at the time of the incident.
Response, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm not asking to publish all of the hundreds of pages, Your Honor. I mean, this is the general orders and the SOPs, our business record that is authenticated by an accompanying business records affidavit. And I can assure to the court I'm not going to publish all hundreds of pages. There are some specific ones that I can publish.
Do you intend to use
I
this?
do, yes, Your Honor. I would like to, and I have them marked, State's Exhibit 23, 312, 313, and 314. That is going to be the CRT.
Are you offering States 21 for all purposes or just record purposes?
At this time, Your Honor, I can offer States 22, I believe, for record purposes. And then I will offer State's Exhibit 23, State's Exhibit 312, State's Exhibit 313, and State's Exhibit 314 for all purposes, and I'm tendering those to the Defense Counsel. And those are the...
Before we go to those, States Exhibit 22 will be admitted for record purposes. And what were the ensuing numbers that you gave?
312, Your Honor,
312,
313, and 314. And State's Exhibit number 23.
Okay.
Did you say no objection?
No objection to 312, 313, 314, and 23.
They're all admitted for all purposes.
Thank you, Your Honor. Information approach again, Your Honor.
Yes.
And Sergeant Watson, I'm going to show you again. Take a look at State's Exhibit number 23. And what is State's Exhibit number 23, Sergeant?
It is the SOP for the crime reduction team.
Okay, and that sets out all the rules and procedures for your unit.
Yes, ma'am.
And can you take a look at State's Exhibit number 312?
Yes, ma'am. It's the SOP for the burglary in progress.
And what is that actual SOP number?
1509.
And could you read that title as well?
Yes, ma'am. Burglary in progress, burglar alarm, open building.
And what is State's Exhibit number 312 related to, or what does that mean?
That gives the officer directions on how the best way to answer a burglary in progress, burglar alarm, or open building is to be conducted.
And what is State's Exhibit number 313?
That is the standard operating procedure for barricaded persons, 1001.
And what is the purpose of 1001?
That sets forth the operating procedure for responding to a barricaded person.
And then lastly, what is State's Exhibit number 314?
That is standard operating procedure 1602 K9 use, and that is the operating procedure to use K9 in different circumstances.
Okay. Now, Sergeant Watson, what, in your opinion, would you say is the purpose of these general standard operating procedures and the general orders?
Those are the best practices when answering those specific kind of situations.
And best practices, what do you mean by the best practices?
Generally, the years and years of doing something, you refine it and revise it so that it's the best way to do it, tactically, manpower-wise.
And would you say that these rules, are they designed for officer safety?
Yes, ma'am.
And I guess subsequently the safety of the public as well?
Yes, ma'am.
And going back to, and would you say that these rules, are they designed for officer safety?
Yes, ma'am.
And I guess subsequently the safety of the public as well?
Yes, ma'am.
And going back to State's Exhibit number 312, which talks about the burglary in progress, burglar alarm, and open building calls, also known as SOP 1509. In CRT, do you have a lot of situations to where officers are responding to burglary calls or open building?
Sometimes.
And what is the procedure for those calls? How should they be handled?
Generally, a two-man will answer that call. During the day and during night hours are totally different because you have to use your lights on your car, you have flashlights and other things that you have to use. Generally, you look for if there has been entry made into whatever location you're looking for. If there has been, then you have several options open to you as far as calling for more officers, setting a perimeter so that if the person is in the location, they can't get away. You also have the option to call for a K9 to search a large building, or for Air 1, which is our police helicopter, to check a roof to make sure nobody's on top hiding. That's kind of the short version.
And thank you for that. Now, earlier you said that typically you work in teams or two-man teams. What's the purpose for that?
So it just depends on who's there that day. We ride one man and two man. There's no requirement to ride two man, but when we're working on something together, then we try to make it more than just one man.
Is it safety in numbers?
Yes, ma'am.
If you have a partner, is there someone available to kind of cover you or watch your back?
Yes, ma'am.
And vice versa?
Yes.
With SOP 1509, I know it says that you have a partner. If you find yourself in a building and it looks as if there's been entry, that you have various options. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And I believe you stated one of those options is you can call for backup.
Yes, ma'am.
If you have a partner, you can, is it, I guess, an area of, if you realize that someone's inside of the building or the habitation, and you can either call for a K-9 that can assist you with the building search at that point, or what happens if you find someone in a home and you aren't able to communicate with them? What's another, how should an officer handle that situation?
As far as them not being able to hear you, because you can always loud hail them on your squad car speaker.
So you can use the squad car speaker, that's correct. So let's say if they aren't following your commands.
If they're not following your commands, then you would treat it as a barricaded person.
And when we say a barricaded person, because I know we have a separate standard operating procedure for that than we do from the burglary open door call, what makes barricaded persons special?
You have to notify SWAT,
Okay.
and they'll come out and respond.
And in that situation, if you have a barricaded person, what should that initial responding officer do? What is their focus at that point in time?
Is to maintain a perimeter and block any routes of escape.
Can you, so maintaining that perimeter, would it be one of a mission of containment at that point, if you will?
Yes, ma'am.
Until backup arrives?
Yes, ma'am.
Would they take cover or even conceal themselves?
Yes, cover and concealment. Cover is hard cover in case they have a weapon. You can get in front of something that would stop a bullet. Concealment is just hiding behind something but still keeping eyes so that you can see if they're trying to make an escape.
So concealment, you can hide your person but not necessarily protect your body should something come through whatever you're hiding behind.
Yes, ma'am.
And so you've got the options. You work in two-man teams. Now, earlier you also mentioned the use of lights. Why is lighting important?
So you can see what's going on.
Okay. I mean, that would make sense, wouldn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
So you call for cover. You either may get yourself in a position to where you're safe while you're waiting for your backup to arrive. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
If it's a barricaded situation, you're going to call for SWAT and again get to a perimeter where you're safe. If it's a situation where you feel like you might need to call in the K-9s or Air 1, you could do that?
Yes, ma'am.
I want to ask you about the SOPs for CRT. I know you stated earlier that the only really specialized training is maybe a couple of day course that you do. Is that course taught by SWAT?
Yes, ma'am.
And in that, do you do drills for open door building searches?
Arrest warrant execution, not so much open building, but we treat them fairly the same.
You're treated the same?
For the most part.
And why?
Because you're looking for somebody. If you're executing an arrest warrant, you're looking for a wanted fugitive. In open building, you're going to be safe also, but you're clearing a building is what you're doing with an open building.
I guess if it's safe to say you don't know what you're walking into, it's best to be prepared.
That's it.
Before you head in.
Yes, ma'am.
And in the drills that are done, I guess through that course by SWAT, are the officers paired in teams?
It's a group, usually five officers and a supervisor.
Okay. And, or I guess, are they putting into practice what's detailed in these SOPs in the general orders of working with a partner, maintaining cover?
Some of the tactics are the same, yes.
Okay. What is a tactical retreat?
Is to safely remove yourself from a situation.
Now, is that to say that you just like turn around and run away?
No, ma'am. You retreat to a perimeter, is what it basically means.
Okay, retreat to a perimeter. And again, the perimeter is an area, I guess, that's kind of away from wherever the threat may possibly be.
Cover concealment.
But under concealment, where the officers can safely maintain a position until additional backup arrives.
Yes, ma'am.
Give me just a moment. Sergeant Watson, in your years, I believe earlier you stated it's been about 6 years since you've been a sergeant over a CRT division.
Yes, ma'am.
Have you had situations to where officers, members of your team have come to you and said, I'm just too exhausted and too tired to work?
They'll ask for days off.
And what do you do in those situations?
For the most part, we allow it.
You allow it, okay. Would it be a responsible thing for a supervisor to address that issue?
Yes, ma'am.
Have you ever had a situation to where you felt like a member of your team was unfit for duty?
No.
Okay, and that's within your 6 years. You never had someone too tired to where you felt that they were a danger to the public to continue working?
No.
If you did have a situation as such, how would you address it?
Do my best to allow them to go home or go back to the station.
Do you make use of relief officers when you can?
Yes.
And in fact, on September 6, 2018, for a couple of the members of your team, they had other, I guess, events that they needed to get to. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And so other members of your team were covering for them.
Yes, ma'am.
Just a moment, Sergeant. Can Commissioner press your honor?
Yes.
Well, Sergeant, this isn't marked as a state's exhibit yet, but I want you to take a look at that and tell me if you're familiar with that.
Yes, ma'am.
And is that a section that's found within the general orders of the Dallas Police Department?
Yes, ma'am. It's part of the code of conduct.
The code of conduct. And what exactly does the code of conduct, in your own words, what's the purpose of the code of conduct?
To spell out how an officer should carry themselves and act.
And Sergeant Watson, are you familiar with a rule or a general order in the code of conduct that deals with officers being off duty?
I'm not sure I know which one you're referring to.
I know there's quite a few of them, but is there a rule that states that officers are always considered on duty even when off duty?
Yes, ma'am.
And is the purpose of that rule to protect life and property?
Yes, ma'am.
And what else do you know about that rule?
I'm not sure what you want me to expound on.
Well, just your knowledge of what does that rule mean to you?
That you always have to carry yourself as professional and conduct your business appropriately. If you're off duty and something occurs, then you have an obligation to call 911, report something that occurs.
Are there any different rules saying that, or any different procedures as to, based on training and experience that an officer receives that says if you're off duty, you should act differently than when you're on duty?
Not that I recall.
In the professional rules of conduct, it's actually titled Professional Conduct and Personal Bearing. Is that correct, in the general orders?
Yes, ma'am.
And I know, and I've got it now, it's going to be marked as State Exhibit number 315, and if it's helpful, I can bring it back up to refresh your
Yes,
memory.
ma'am, if you could.
Would that be helpful?
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Would a violation of the rules, though, be considered a dereliction of duty?
It could be, yes.
And so I'm going to bring it back up here to refresh your memory, and at this time, it is marked as State Exhibit number 315. And you let me know after you read it. You finished, Sergeant?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Now, exactly what is the title of State's Exhibit 315?
It is going to be, Your Honor, Professional Conduct and Personal Bearing.
And your objection to that exhibit is what?
Your Honor, it's irrelevant to what happened. They're trying to introduce some sort of administrative violation into the evidence that's irrelevant to the case.
I'm sorry, but I'm going to need you to speak up just a little bit. I don't know my ears are clogged, but I don't want to guess at what it is you're saying.
Ma'am, I believe it's irrelevant. They're trying to introduce an administrative violation into the case. That's not relevant to the case.
Judge, that's not what we're trying to do at all. Your Honor, two things. Mr. Snyder said in a speaking objection that, very clearly this was off-duty and therefore the general orders don't apply, and his objection to our admission of that. But secondarily, Your Honor, we're not looking to show conformity with a bad act. The orders of the Dallas Police Department say, in relevant part, for the purposes of protecting life and property, officers will always be considered on duty while in the city of Dallas and shall be prepared to act to the extent possible anytime circumstances indicate their service is required. The above enforcement action will not include enforcement of Class C misdemeanors, and it goes on to talk about for traffic offenses. So an off-duty officer needs not go on duty pursuant to his obligations according to DPD for that, or for enforcement responsibilities beyond the ability of the officer when he is not armed. Amber Guyger was armed. We're going to prove that. This indicates that as soon as Mr. Rogers gave an opening statement in which he said that she believed that there was an intruder in her home, that means that she is now on duty according to the orders and the standard operating procedures of the Dallas Police Department, and she should have been governed by what she was taught. That again goes to the circumstances she finds herself in and whether she acted reasonably. For all purposes.
315?
315.
Which one of you are going to speak?
Well, again, Ms. Mullen.
It's also improper character trait evidence. They're trying to say that because she didn't conform with administrative procedure, that makes it relevant to whether she is guilty of the indicted offense. So
I'm not going to make that conclusion that that's what it is they're trying to say. I think this door was opened when your co-counsel mentioned that she was in fact off duty. From what I'm listening, that's how I'm hearing how we started down this road. And Sergeant Watson has testified that a DPD officer is in fact on duty at all times, and I believe the state was just entering into evidence their policies and procedures that state the same thing. So, and just so we're clear, I am not a fan of speaking objections. I need you to stand up, state your legal objection, and be done with it. Because all kinds of invited error happen when we have speaking objections, including you arguing before this jury that Ms. Guyger was in fact off duty when this happened. And she was, but she is also a Dallas police officer. So what is your objection to State Exhibit 315?
Again, Your Honor, it's irrelevant to the other policies that they've introduced. If they want to try to hold her to the policies that they've already introduced into evidence, then they have the ability to do that. Now, it's irrelevant whether or not there's a code of conduct, that they're going to try to prove that she's violated the code of conduct by not following these other policies, which we certainly don't agree were applicable in the situation.
I don't know if I can jump that far. I certainly think that that would be a question that would be objectionable. But I'm going to overrule your objection to State's Exhibit. Are you even offering 315?
Yes, Your Honor, we're offering 315 for all purposes.
I'm going to overrule your objection to State's Exhibit 315. Is there anything else that we need to take up before we bring the jury back in?
Judge, there is a quick matter. Did you have something?
No, just make sure this is admitted, Judge. I didn't hear that part.
Yes.
Thank you.
Judge, just so that we don't have to take another break in between for the next witness, I believe that discussions with the defense during the break, the state is going to offer State's Exhibit 3 and 307 into evidence. These are going to be extracts from the phone dump of Amber Guyger for the date of...
Let me get these numbers. 3?
Yes.
And what might 3 be?
3 is going to be the timeline, the extract of her records in their entirety for September the 6th, 2018. Yeah, that's correct. 307, Your Honor, is
From her phone.
Yes, ma'am. 307 is going to be just those for which she had conversations with Martin Rivera.
Is 303 offered for what purposes? For
It's
the
going to
record?
be, no ma'am, 3 and 307 for all purposes, and I believe we have a reading.
How far into the evening does this timeline extend?
I believe it extends until midnight, but I'd have to take a look at the records.
Does that encompass the conversations that she allegedly had with her sister?
No ma'am, I don't believe so.
Because it wasn't clear to me which day that might have taken place.
Right, no, that was out.
And when you say the phone records concerning her and Mr. Rivera, does 307 encompass the text as well as the time frame of the telephone conversation?
Yes ma'am, it does. 307 and 3 would cover both, in both of those. Anything, 3 would cover the entire day, because it also includes location data. 307 is just extracting from 3 just the specific text messages and interactions over the phone with Martin Rivera.
All of them?
Well, the ones that we were able to recover, Your Honor. These were all deleted, as the court is aware, and we had to go through a process to try and recover them. These were the text messages and the information that we were able to recover. I simply can't tell the court that it's all of them because I don't know.
These are what you all have agreed to?
Well, I didn't, let's just, 307. Our agreement was that we're not contesting, these are texts between her and Martin Rivera. We're, for 307, we are objecting under, that they're not relevant pursuant to Rule 401. The probative value far outweighed by the prejudicial effect on Rule 403. It is an improper stretch use of 3836. It's improper character evidence under 404A and 404B1, and it's a misleading or improper way to use Rule 404B as absence of mistake or lack of accident. It doesn't speak to that. And so for 307, we object for those reasons.
Those are the same reasons that
Right,
were
I'm just
attached
reading for the
to
record.
your motion and limine.
Yes, Your Honor.
Those objections will be overruled, and the same limitations apply.
I understand.
And Judge, we just asked for a running objection to any, so I don't have to object every time, for everything in reference to any text messages that are the subject of State's Exhibit 307. We'd ask that a running objection to that.
You may have a running objection to 307. Those are the phone records allegedly between the defendant and Mr. Rivera.
Yes, Your Honor.
Order a break. We'll start back at 5 minutes before 4.
Rivera that morning. It indicates when she's going.
20 some odd pages of this. What other information there is in here that might be relevant to the issue at hand?
Yes, ma'am. May I tell you what I think would be relevant about it?
Yes.
Okay. Number one, Your Honor, it establishes when Ms. Guyger has sent texts indicating when she's going to different locations. For example, her texts indicate that she's partnering up with Martin Rivera that morning. It indicates when she's going to the scene with the SWAT operation. It also is clearly in response to Mr. Rogers' opening statement about how they always have to be on guard. It's the intensity of it. They always have to be on guard. State's Exhibit number 3 shows you that particular day for the hours in which she is working. She is checking emails. She is going on WFAA.com, looking at Dallas Police Department officers who have internal affairs problems. She's going to Pinterest. She's going to Facebook. She's reading Dallas Police Department emails. Again, so much of this is going to be cast, it's going to become relevant in response to what they are saying. So they've put in front of this jury that she's always got to be on guard. And State's Exhibit number 3 indicates a day full of basically spending her time on the phone perusing the internet, going to various different websites, certainly not being on guard she's in the middle of reading an article on Pinterest. So I think that it goes towards that. But most importantly, it shows the interaction with her and her officers at the various different assignments that we both talked about she was doing that day.
All right, your objection to State's Exhibit 3 is overruled.
Now, Your
What
Honor,
else do we need to find out before I give the court reporter a short break?
nothing, but Your Honor, if I will take State's Exhibit 3 to Mr. Rogers, and in the event that Mr. Rogers wants certain portions of that for officer safety or anything like that redacted, I will certainly be amenable for any issues like that, and I'll reoffer as redacted.
I don't know whether or not you wish that or not, Mr. Rogers. Inasmuch as your opening argument did tend to indicate to the jury that this was an extremely intense and stressful day, I think State's Exhibit 3 becomes relevant to demonstrate that during the course of these 14 or so hours that Ms. Guyger was working, there was a substantial amount of down and or leisure time that she spent, which is contrary to the argument that you put forth. If you all wish to redact those portions of State's Exhibit 3 that relate to officer safety, I certainly would encourage that. But that will be a jury ruling, not my order. Okay, now we're going to give the court reporter a break, and we'll start back. Can you recover in 15 minutes? You don't want to break? Okay. That was enough of a break. Okay, let's bring the jury back then. Later than 8:15.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So P, stated in this general order of the Dallas Police Department, 4.1.H, that officers are always considered on duty. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, that's what it says.
And then going back to State's Exhibit number 312, which is Standard Operating Procedure 1509, burglary in progress, burglar alarm, open building, that we spoke about earlier. In this SOP, would you agree with me, Sergeant, that it lists at least 4 separate occasions where it states that officers are to pair off with a partner,
Yes, ma'am.
that they are to utilize their lights,
Yes, ma'am.
that they are to use cover and or concealment depending on the situation,
Yes, ma'am.
that they are to consider a tactical retreat depending on the situation.
Yes, ma'am.
And again, all of these things are for officer safety, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And that if there is a situation to where it looks like entry has been made, you can either treat it as a barricaded person, which means you're going to call for SWAT,
Yes, ma'am.
and then it becomes a situation of containment and maintaining a perimeter until the additional officers arrive. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And Sergeant Watson, do you know if the defendant had a take-home radio?
Every officer is assigned a radio.
Every officer is assigned one?
Yes, ma'am.
And is it common practice are those radios always charged,
Generally, yes.
generally? And at headquarters, I know that officers, there's a place for them to charge their body cams, is that correct?
That I couldn't answer.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
But are there charges for the radios at the headquarters?
When you're assigned a radio, you're given your own personal charger. So if you're looking for a charger at headquarters, it would have to be somebody else's personal charger.
Okay, but are a lot of charges at headquarters though?
I honestly don't know, ma'am. I don't work down there, so
So that's like main headquarters?
that's
So
main
at your
headquarters.
station, though-
I have a charger on my desk.
Okay, and so at your station, do you have chargers?
Yes, ma'am.
Pass the witness.
Did you?
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Sergeant Watson, you spoke about Amber Guyger was selected for the CRT that she had been interviewed, correct?
Yes, sir.
and you were part of that interview process?
Yes, sir.
And the criteria that you spoke about, she met your criteria?
Yes, sir.
And the rest of the panel? Correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, the CRT team, what are the normal work hours for the CRT?
At that time, it was 8 a.m. to 4 p.m.
Back in September of last year?
Yes.
Was it common for members of the CRT to work overtime?
Yes, sir.
Was it predictable?
It's never predictable.
And is that unpredictable because of the nature of the job, chasing dangerous criminals?
Yes, sir.
Now, you spoke a little bit about the SWAT team on September the 6th using CRT, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And is it your understanding that the SWAT team was involved in an arrest of some robbery suspects? Correct?
Yes, sir.
And is it also your understanding at some point after the arrest, the SWAT team was done and the suspects were in custody, correct?
Yes, sir.
The SWAT team, is it your understanding the SWAT team was done for the day, but the CRT team had to keep the suspects in custody at headquarters?
Yes, sir.
And then SWAT team's done, who takes over at that point?
CRT handles it.
Is somebody at headquarters also working the case?
The investigators, yes.
So SWAT goes, now investigators are working it, but CRT is constant throughout the ordeal, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, you were asked some questions about some of the various policies of the department. For instance, you were asked about 1509 regarding burglary in progress.
Yes, sir.
All that. And you stated that these are best practices of the department, correct?
Yes, sir.
Are those best practices for officers responding to dispatched calls?
Yes, sir.
That's what they're written for, correct?
It's my understanding that's what they're written for.
So when you talk about the use of the lights, the use of a partner, you're speaking specifically about officers who are responding to dispatched calls, correct?
Yes, sir.
And are you pretty familiar with 1509?
Fairly, yes, sir.
Okay. Are you familiar with the part of 1509 at the beginning of the policy that says always be prepared for a possible ambush?
Yes, sir.
And this is about ambush when officers respond to a burglary call, correct?
Yes, sir.
Is that because officers are prepared or trained to expect a dangerous situation if there's a burglary in progress?
Yes, sir.
Now, there's other contingencies, barricaded person, use of canine. Those are all part of the best practices for officers responding to dispatch calls. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, getting back to the burglary in progress call that states about being prepared for possible ambush. To you, does that mean if an officer is responding to a burglary in progress call and the officer is attacked?
Yes, sir.
And there's the other contingencies in the police department's general orders and standard operating procedures. They don't negate an officer's right to self-defense, do they?
Not that I'm aware of.
And you're familiar with the way that officers are trained, and CRT officers are trained, correct?
Yes, sir.
And they're trained, as part of their training for the Dallas Police Department, they're trained in self-defense, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Including through the use of a firearm, correct?
Yes, sir.
Pass the witness.
Briefly, Your Honor. Sergeant Watson, where are officers trained to shoot an individual?
At the Firearms Training Center?
And where on an individual's person
Oh,
are
I'm
they
sorry.
trained to shoot them?
In their torso, I'm sorry.
In their torso?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that also considered center mass?
Yes, ma'am.
No further questions, Your Honor. Pass the witness.
Did you have Reed?
No, ma'am.
For the cross?
That's what.
May you be excused? Would you like to be subject to recall?
Subject to recall, I know he has some trip issues, I don't want to interfere with that, but just to have us the opportunity to recall him just in case and subject to the rule.
All right, so Sergeant Watson, you certainly understand that there may be a need to recall you to the witness stand. And so please don't discuss your testimony with any other persons, and don't do so with anyone except the attorneys, and make certain you're outside the presence of any other witnesses.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much.